Auckland to Mars, going to the Red Planet today. A man once at the cutting edge of music after a chance meeting with Cliff Richard's manager in a Soho coffee shop. He and his longtime schoolmate Bruce Welch became part of Cliff's backing band, the Drifters. Now, the Drifters were never much in Cliff's shadow. They weren't that kind of band, though they soon became known as the Shadows. Cliff changed his name from Harry Webb, and Brian Rankin changed his too, to Hank Marvin. Welcome to New Zealand, Hank, and to 8 Months to Mars.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this trip.
Well, speaking of trip, you've had a decent flight, but it hasn't been that long because you're no longer living in the UK.
No. I've been living in Perth, Western Australia for 27 to 28 years.
Yeah. And in a place, am I right, you're still in Brigadoon? Is this right?
No. We sold up there when everyone left home, and we were rattling around in a far too large property, and we live in the city now.
My wife, okay.
Carol and myself. Yeah.
Right. I thought there might be a place in Brigadoon called Brigadoon in Western Australia, you see.
There is.
Oh, there is, yeah.
Yeah, that's where we lived for...
you were there?
About 16 years, yeah.
Yeah. But you're in Perth proper now.
Yeah, in the city. City people.
Now, because I've mentioned it in the intro, Cliff changed his name, Sir Cliff, because I think a songwriter, Ian Samuel, suggested a change of name. Why did you?
Well, it was the thing in those days, screen actors changed their names. I mean, John Wayne was not John Wayne. Was he Marilyn or something like that?
Marion Morrison.
Marion Morrison, yeah. Most actors seem to change their names. And, of course, a lot of Americans had great sounding, very cool names, and we wanted to try to have that cool rock and roll sound. And I was always called Hank from the age of 11 at school, and that just became a nickname which stuck. And then the surname Marvin came from a country and western singer who was part Cherokee Indian. His name was Marvin Rainwater. And it had some big hits in the US, but a huge hit in the UK called Whole Lotta Woman. Good record at the time.
Yeah.
And I liked the sound of that, Marvin. Seemed to fit well. So I became Hank B. Marvin.
It was a good choice, actually.
Thank you.
It suited your stage presence. As you say, it sort of gave you, a bit of grit or something. It worked.
Yeah. A fellow, Tim Rice, who's, I've known for far too many years, he always calls me Hank B when he sees me. So he always puts the B in. It's Hank B.
Well, as Hank Marvin, and in fact you became Cockney rhyming slang.
Yeah.
That's how famous you were.
Yeah.
Marvin standing for starvin'?
Starvin'.
Hungry?
Yeah. So when people are hungry, they say, oh, gee, I'm Hank Marvin.
Hank Marvin.
Yeah. In fact, we did a TV commercial last year, which they extended into this year. It was successful for a product in Britain, which was a protein snack aimed at kids, school kids, when they come home from school to keep them going till tea time. And they had all these kids walking out of school with red Stratocasters, black glasses on, and it was a very amusing commercial, very successful, and it ended up with a lovely shot of a dachshund dog with a pair of black glasses on, looking at the camera.
What guitar do you play on stage now, by the way? What's your usual guitar?
Well, if I was doing, say, Shadows material or my own stuff, I would be using Stratocasters. I usually have 3 of them, different string gauges for different numbers, and I'd have a couple of acoustics. But on this tour that we're doing in New Zealand, it's a gypsy swing, gypsy jazz tour. So we're using specialized guitars. They're acoustic guitars, but they're sort of gypsy jazz guitars. They're based on the old Selmers that Django Reinhardt used in the 30s and 40s, but they're modern versions of them.
Yeah, because you're synonymous with the Strat. In fact, wasn't yours the first Strat in England?
Yes, it was. Cliff very kindly bought that for me. I had a weird little rock and roll looking guitar called an Antoria, made in Japan, which had an interesting sound, but it was hell to play because the neck was bent. I think Fred Flintstone made it. It was such a bad little... But it looked like a rock and roll guitar, and but not very nice to play. So Cliff said, look, I'd like to get you a decent guitar. What do you reckon? And we'd seen this photograph of Buddy Holly holding a guitar that we did not know the origin, and it turned out to be a Fender Stratocaster. It looked like it came out of space, from Mars, in fact, where I'm going. And we decided that's the guitar to go for. And we had to order it direct from the States because you couldn't buy new American instruments in the UK at that point. So that was 59, summer of 59.
You lost that guitar at one point, I'm told.
Well, I gave it back to Cliff in 1961. Jennings, who then became the Fender importers, said, "Look, we can give you all red guitars, red bass, red Strat for Bruce if you like." We thought, hey, that looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I gave Cliff the guitar back, and he had it until about 1958. It's now in Bruce Walsh's hands, and there's an interesting little story here. Bruce has claimed for years that Cliff gave him this guitar, and Cliff said to me about 5 years, he said, "Hank, I didn't give it to him." He said, "If I was going to give it to anyone, I'd give it to you." He said, "In fact, in my will, I've left it to you if I go first." So I said, "Look, Cliff, it's got a lot of memories, but it's not that important." He said, "But no," he said, "I didn't give it to Bruce. He asked to borrow it, never gave it back." So on the last tour, Brian Bennett said to me, that's the Shadows drummer, by the way, he said, "Right, we're getting to the bottom of this." After a meal one night after a show, he said, "Bruce, I have a question." He said, "Did Cliff give you that guitar, or did you just keep it?" And Bruce went very sheepish and eventually owned up and said, "Well, actually," he said, "I just borrowed it and didn't give it back."
Ah, the truth came out.
And but he still claims it as his own. I think squatters' rights or something.
A couple of things from what you've just said. First of all, you mentioned Buddy Holly. The difference with the Crickets is that, apart from musical aficionados, nobody knows who they were now, whereas we know the Shadows. And the interesting thing about the Shadows, it seems to me also, apart from the fact that you were stars in your own right, is your seemingly thoroughly amicable friendship with Cliff, which has stayed close over the years. It was an unusual kind of relationship, that whole business, wasn't it?
It was at that point with a singer and a backing band.
Yeah.
From the very first tour we did in October '58, I mean, Bruce and I were 16. Cliff was 17. He's always been older. And we just struck up this relationship. We became friends. We just went out together all the time, like five guys in a band. It wasn't a singer and his backing band, although that was the business relationship. Cliff was paying us. And we just struck up this friendship, and that's gone on down through the years. We don't live in each other's pockets, but Cliff and I just pick it up from time to time. He was in Perth in February this year, and he always asks me if I'm around, "Do you want to get up and do a few numbers with me?" Which I love doing. It's great fun, and we have a meal, and
the audience
he pays for the meal, which is great.
He pays for the meal,
yeah. And it's one of those relationships. We don't see each other all the time, but it's just as if you haven't left off when you get back together. Fun enough, when he was going out with Sue Barker, the tennis girl, way back, things got difficult for them. They wanted to have some time on their own, and it was difficult. Where do they go if they want to go out to eat? So I used to phone up my wife, Carol, and say, "Carol, can we come over and have a meal at your place?" And he'd turn up and have he and Sue, because they had some peace and quiet there.
Yeah, because people always wondered about that relationship, but you saw it close up, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was a genuine one.
It was genuine. It just didn't work out, unfortunately.
This isn't a Shadows tour, as you've alluded to. This is you and a newfound musical guise, really, isn't it? So how has this happened that you've come to New Zealand to play this music?
Well, Gray Bartlett, the promoter, very kindly invited us to think about doing a tour here. And we never toured with this before. We've done jazz clubs, we've done a few jazz festivals. People seem to love the music and the way we play it. But the thought of and the opportunity of coming to New Zealand, which I've always enjoyed. Secondly, of playing 9 shows. Normally, we don't get the chance to play more than, say, 2. And then we don't play for 3 or 4 months because I don't like going out on the road anymore. And this is a real opportunity to just, play. We just love playing. It's a great form of music to play. As Tommy Emmanuel said to me, because he is also a Django Reinhardt fan, and he loves this music, he said, "It just makes people smile." And it's true. They seem to it's very accessible music. It's a form of jazz. It's swing music. Some of it is kind of Latin-based, but we've got very good arrangements. It's very structured. The tunes are good. People seem to absorb them quickly. They're not difficult, complicated jazz compositions. And we don't indulge in overlong solos, which I think is, too many people sort of just want to keep playing solos for about 5 minutes. And I think for most of us, it's just a big yawn.
Yeah, well, it's the modern era, isn't it? So that's shrewdly observed. And you also would have a good idea, after all these years, of what an audience needs and wants. You'd have an eye on that too.
Yeah, well, look, audiences need respect, one. I believe you should go out there and respect your audience. They paid money to see you. They deserve your respect, and they deserve the best you can possibly give them. So we go out, we make sure we get the sound as good as we can possibly get it in a live venue before the show. So that's going to be of good quality. And obviously we're well rehearsed, so we know that what we're playing is also of good quality. And I love getting involved with an audience, you know, with humor and things like this. And to me, that's the best of both worlds. If you play music that people enjoy, even with what it was, say, with my band when I was touring in UK and Europe, or with the Shadows, and then you add to that some humor, to me it's like a little bit of icing on the cake. Audiences seem to love the combination of good music and laughter.
Tommy Emmanuel, you mentioned him. You see, you move in that kind of stratosphere of great guitar players, and you must run into them. Are you all guitared out often, and you don't want to talk about guitar music? You don't want to compare fingerings and all that sort of... I mean, what's it like when you meet these guys?
No, guitarists are, I think drummers are the same. You know, we just seem to... Obviously, lots of other important things in the world to talk about, but we often talk about music, about guitars, and this guitar, that guitar, how you played this, or have you tried this, or whatever it might be, or have you heard this one? You pick up it. And that seems to be the way it goes with guitarists. So we're dangerous when we get together. We seem to exclude other people. You see,
there's some great luthiers in New Zealand who make great guitars, and you probably don't get to meet all of them, but you must be buttonholed sometimes by some people holding up guitars and saying, "Hank, would you play this? You know, love your endorsement of this."
Not too bad. I had a few over the years where people have tried to encourage me to use a certain product. Yeah. And if it was an electric guitar, it didn't interest me because the Strat was my sound, my instrument.
Yeah.
It felt right for me. In terms of acoustic instruments, that didn't bother me too much because I've got some really beautiful acoustic guitars which I use in the studio but wouldn't take on the road. And I've used Matons on the road mainly because they're terrific instruments, and they're pretty reliable, but they don't cost the earth. You know, you don't want to take something that's a 10 grand guitar or a 15 grand guitar on the road. Something awful could happen to it.
Hank Marvin, going to Mars, we'll ask him who his compadres are on this, well, not on the Mars trip, but around New Zealand. We'll talk a bit more about that. But on the intergalactic iPod, when you've got your headphones on, heading off across the void, we ask you to choose some songs. And, gee, what would Hank Marvin choose? What have you got first up?
I find this really difficult because I don't have any 2 or 3 absolute favorites. I've got so many that I like, and I guess my choice would change from day to day or week to week. I have to choose for this trip, so one of the tracks I've chosen is from the Pearlfishers opera. It's the duet between the baritone and the tenor.
In the depths of the temple.
Yeah, au cœur du fond, yeah, in the depths of the temple. It's a most beautiful piece of music, and the version I have is Jussi Berling, the Swedish baritone. I can't remember the guy who sings tenor on.
Robert Merrill?
It could well be. And that's a beautiful recording, magnificent singing, and such a gorgeous piece of music, you know, the sort of thing you could listen to, and it lifts your heart up, which is beautiful.
Oh, look, I'll play this for my mum too. This is one of her favourites. I think this is a great version, isn't it? Okay. Interesting that you chose this. I didn't know you had that interest in classical music. You see, it's interesting finding out about people.
Yes, I enjoy classical music. I've got a reasonable library on CD and, would you believe, vinyl. And it makes a wonderful change listening to the sound of a beautiful orchestra and magnificent composition. It makes a lovely change to listen to that after listening to, say, rock and roll or jazz or something else. I'm pretty Catholic in my music taste, and I like to give everything a whirl. Some things I simply don't like, end of story. But classical music in general, I think, it's a must that you have to give it some attention.
You see, you fraternise with all sorts of musicians. Who is with you on this 9-date tour of New Zealand? Who are your playing companions?
Well, I have on accordion a most magnificent musician, a guy called Nunzio Mondia. Nunzio is a Sicilian name. That's where his family originally from. So you've got to be careful how you talk to him. He is a classically trained pianist. I've used him on quite a few albums over the years on different keyboards, piano, few arrangements. But what an accordion player. He's magnificent. And on rhythm guitar, we have Gary Taylor. Gary is from the UK originally. He used to be in a band called The Herd with Peter Frampton.
Oh, yeah, that band.
Then he became, when they broke up, he became a top session man in London, mainly on bass guitar and rhythm guitar. Then he was a radio presenter for the BBC. And then he moved to Perth and he used to write jingles, commercials, and do voiceovers and all that stuff, and do sessions. And he's played in a few of my albums too. On bass, we have Robbie Pisano. We like to keep that Italian connection going.
Yeah, you do.
He's a lovely guy, very good, fine bass player, on double bass, yeah. So that's the team. It's the quartet, the Gypsy Jazz Quartet.
What's the attraction of Perth for you Brits, please? Must be a few of you there by now.
Oh, yeah, there's quite a large population from the UK in Perth. I think the climate was one of the things. It's a Mediterranean climate. You usually have pretty consistent summers. When we moved there was a lot less people, a lot of space, beautiful beaches, and then you can get out of the city and get into the Swan Valley, where you've got lots of nice wineries, restaurants, cafes, probably within, depending where you live in the city, between 20, 25 minutes. It's got a lot going. Yes, it is an isolated city, but at the same time, it's closer to Europe and Asia than the East Coast.
Yeah, it is.
Sydney, Melbourne.
Yeah.
It's like 3 hours closer, and that's all on a long haul flight. You really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, that makes a big difference. You're right. You're strategically placed. Hank Marvin is going to Mars. All right. Well, as befits a man of your stature, it can be a big spaceship and with lots of comforts. And you don't tour much, or you say you don't like to tour as much as you used to. So would you have the time to make the trip?
To Mars?
Yeah.
Anyone would make the time to go to Mars. I think it would be something very special.
It would. All right. Who would the travelling companions to Mars be then?
How many am I allowed to take?
As many as you like, Mr. Marvin.
I'd like to take my wife. I think she'd be very important.
That's a good idea.
to take on this trip. She'd never forgive me if I left her alone. No, I'd have to take my wife, Carol. That would be wonderful. Other people, I think people of interest, sadly now dead, but if we could somehow resurrect him, Peter Ustinov would be the most amazing traveling companion. Yeah. Very funny man and used to tell a lot of wonderful stories. Probably a good chef. My wife's a great cook, actually, but perhaps a good chef. Who would you take? There's so many top. Maybe Jamie, young Jamie.
Oh, it would be Jamie. It wouldn't be a Sicilian or an Italian chef.
Well, Jamie can do it all.
Yeah, he can.
And he can save you money.
Yeah.
When he does it. And he does it. I tried one of his 15-minute meals. It took me 2.5 hours.
Yes, I've done the same with Jamie. All right. So Jamie Oliver and the family and Peter Ustinov, whoever you like, really. What colour would you want the spaceship? Would you want it red like those early
No,
states?
I think a nice silver spaceship so it reflects all those lovely stars and planetary luminaries. That would be rather nice.
All right. If you had to or could add just one musician from the ages or from your lifetime onto the crew list, who would that one musician be besides you?
I'd probably choose a guitarist because obviously a guitar doesn't take too much room up, and a guitarist can almost be like a mini orchestra, I'm not like that, unfortunately, but some are. I would have possibly the choice between perhaps someone like Django Reinhardt, if we could also resurrect him, because he was a wonderful musician and an amazing character. But on the other hand, I also enjoy flamenco music, and maybe Paco de Lucia or Paco Pina, one of those two. They're both fantastic musicians, and they could while away many an hour while I tap my heels on the floor as they're playing. That would be probably sensational.
Okay, so it wouldn't be Jimmy Page or Peter Frampton, or it wouldn't be any of the modern guys if it really came down to it.
Probably not. No. They'd want big amplifiers and stacks, and all that. So it'd be too loud.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, Brian May's a funny guy. I know Brian quite well. He's a real gentleman, lovely guy, and he's such a quiet man. He speaks very quietly and very politely. But as soon as he turns that amp on, we were in the studio once together, and I was there for about an hour and a half while he was recording something. And I couldn't believe the level at which he has the studio monitors. The engineer and myself, we were almost in pain with it, and it didn't seem to bother him, unless, of course, he had ear attenuators in, which we didn't see. But I tell you what, if he continues to play like that, he's going to be deaf by the time
Well, surprising he's not now. Your hearing's fine, I take it?
Sorry?
That's quick.
Yeah, it's pretty good, my hearing, thanks, for a man of my condition.
Well, you're, as I said when you came in, all flattery aside, you're a man who looks in great condition, so you obviously look after yourself as well.
I try. I think it's important. You know, we need to... I think you get the best out of life when you look after yourself without getting paranoid about it. Just eat sensibly and exercise. And then you can do a lot of things that if you don't do that, you'd find you wouldn't be able to do. And, you know, I used to like playing a lot of tennis. Haven't played for a year or so, but I'll get back into it. And, you know, when you're running around a lot, you've got to be reasonably fit. Otherwise, there's all this going on, and you've got to call the ambulance with the oxygen.
Yeah. Well, we're heading out into a big universe as we head towards your second music choice. Do you think the universe is there by accident or design?
I think it's there by design.
You're a man of some faith.
Yes. I mean, there's a tremendous lot of evidence in the scientific world to back up the thought of intelligent design out there. You know, we've got laws that we live by, gravity, this, that, and the other. So many things. You know, you look at one single... I've got a wonderful DVD produced by 5 scientists in the USA, different fields of endeavor, and they've got some marvelous computer graphics of what goes on inside a single cell. It is truly amazing. The precision, how things are dropped off, picked up, put in exactly the right place, and how the cell is protected almost like an armored city trying to stop, you know, anything that would cause a problem getting in. Yeah. Doesn't always work, of course, and absolutely brilliant, you know. And it's as one of them said, if Darwin had seen this, he would never even come up with this theory. You know. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, but it's the complexity that persuades you, obviously. All right.
Yes.
Your second music choice, then. What have you got for us now?
I'm going to go for a song, a record actually I've always loved. It's a bluesy rock record from the UK by a band called Free, and the song is All Right Now. And there's a cracking guitar solo on this record by, sadly, the now late Paul Kossoff. And Paul's father, David Kossoff, was an actor. And Cliff and the Shadows, did a 6-month season at the London Palladium in 1960. 2 shows a day for 6 days a week for 6 months. And it was amazing to be in one place for that amount of time, you know, rather than being on the road. And we played a heck of a lot of people over that period because there were packed houses every night. One of the supports, because it was a big production show, you know, they had dancers, they had comedians, and one of the guys on there was David Kossoff, who was an actor but used to present these monologues which were kind of amusing. And David used to talk to me, and he said, I enjoy your music and everything. He said, my son is learning to play guitar. He said, well, I'm trying to encourage him to practice. Do you have any, could you write a message? And I wrote a little message for him just to encourage him to stick at it and play and everything. And a few years later, of course, about 1966, maybe, 67, I heard this remarkable record, and then I saw them on TV and found out that the young lad was Paul Kossoff, David's son. And he'd been studying classical guitar originally, but then he'd gone on to electric because he wanted to play, you know, bluesy rock. Good play, he had a fantastic finger vibrato. Sadly, he got into drugs, as many did, and he died on a flight across the Atlantic when he was still quite a young man. But wonderful player. And, of course, Paul Rodgers was a singer in this band, who's a heck of a singer. I met Paul a couple of times and seen him sing live, and he's brilliant. He's really good. He's got a wonderful feel.
That's a great story. Did the younger Kossoff, did you ever run into him? Did he say, Hank, I stuck at it because of that note from you?
No, sadly, I never got the chance to meet him in the flesh. It was always, I saw him on TV or something like this, you know. We never just met up. Just one of those things. I would like to have met up with him and just to say how much I admired his work at that point. I really did. I thought he was playing very fine guitar.
Yeah, you must have been chuffed when you first heard this, actually. And thought,
yeah, great record.
Hank Marvin going to Mars with us today. Because you're a man of such musical diversity, which is interesting to find out as we go, was rock and roll your first choice of genre?
No, not really. At the age of 8, I started piano lessons. I did that for 2.5 years, and then stupidly I persuaded my parents to let me stop when I went to grammar school because we then had homework. Oh, I couldn't do homework and practice, you know. I really regretted that by the time I got to about 17, 18. I thought, God, I wish I'd kept this up. Because the piano is a terrific instrument to have as a bass. When I was 14, I got interested in folk blues music, people like Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, Lead Belly, Big Bill Broonzy. And that led me on to the idea of maybe playing guitar. However, I also got interested in New Orleans jazz, and the instrument that attracted me in that was the clarinet. I loved the way the clarinet sort of just weaved in and out of and around the trumpet, you know, a very agile instrument. And I thought, I'll never be able to afford a clarinet. So talking with a schoolmaster, a French master at school one day, who took music lessons with us as well, happened to mention this. And he said they play banjos in a New Orleans jazz. I said, yes, they do. He said, I have a banjo. I said, really? I said, do you want to sell it? He said, well, yeah, I suppose so. I said, how much do you want? He said, £2 10 shillings. So I said, can I pay you £0.50 a week? He said, no problem. Brought it to school the next day, and that was my first entry into a stringed instrument. Skiffle came on the scene. That became very popular. Rock and roll at that point hadn't really quite happened. It was starting to happen. And how I got into rock and roll, Bruce Welsh, my colleague in the Shads, we were in the same skiffle group. And the guy who ran the group he was an old guy, he was 18 years old. And he said, right, we're going to put on a dance in one of these little mining villages in Northumberland, just outside of my hometown of Newcastle. He had us as a skiffle group, a rock and roll band, and a ballad singer with a little trio. The rock and roll band didn't turn up. We thought, what are we going to do? And Bruce said, I know maybe 6 rock and roll songs. And we quickly learned the songs. They were almost all 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
We learned them, went on, played them. I thought, this is great. Love this. Love this. So, and we thought, hey, let's start getting into the rock and roll scene. And one thing that intrigued me was the guitar sound and the approach of the guitar players. It was not like anything I'd heard before. Most of the guitar players I'd heard were either jazz-based, with that sweet sort of mellow jazz sound, or, I don't know, just a bit corny. And these guys had this twanging sound, and often with this strange echo, which I later found out was a short tape echo. Yeah. And suddenly I was into rock and roll, and that was what I wanted then to do.
You've been quoted in the past about being initially embarrassed by how much money you were getting paid.
You soon get over it, though. Now, I'll tell you what it was. When we first started touring the Cliff, we were getting like £25 a week, which doesn't sound much now, but in 1958, 59, it was a lot of money. Yeah. And my dad was earning like £10 a week, and I kept saying, he works all those hours, get £10 a week, and I'm getting 25, whether I'm working or not. And then, of course, once we started having our own success, we're into a different bracket again. Yeah. And it's a strange thing, this feeling of guilt. But as I say, I did eventually get over it. You do, don't you?
The Hank Marvin fans, of which there are many, so they come to hear you play whatever you play? Will you get Shadows fans on this tour?
We'll probably get some. What I found when the Shadows broke up in 1990, I started recording for Polygram, which had been our record company. They gave me a 5 solo album deal, and they said to me, look, Hank, love you to put a band together and go on the road. And I said, I can't do that. I was part of a group. I'm not a solo artist. I feel uncomfortable. They persuaded me. Eventually, I did it. And we found on the first tour, and some of the fans were saying, I'm not going to see him without the Shadows. Fortunately, a lot of them came along, and the word got out that this was really good, and I was doing a lot of Shadows material, and a lot of them said it's better than when the Shadows do it. But anyway, that's one side of the story. So you do get this resistance. You try to do something different. There will be a section of the fan base who are very open-minded and will come along. And the ones that have come along to jazz clubs or festival gigs, they go, wow, never heard this music before. This is great. Love it. And they buy the album. But there will definitely be a percentage who will say, no, I'm not. I want to hear him play Apache, Wonderful Land, etc., FBI. So that's the reality. You get a resistance to it. And
yet the Guitar Player was probably your most successful album, especially in the US, wasn't it? Even bigger than the Shadows material, I think.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, That was partially because as I started doing my own tours, I started to introduce some acoustic guitar work on stage and also on record. For example, I might record a tune, play it, on the Strat with the sound that people knew and loved, and then I might do an improvised solo on acoustic guitar. So you've got a change of a tone color, a dynamic change, and I got really good feedback from the fans. And a few of them said, "Why don't you do an acoustic album?" And that's what started the idea off. Mm. And it was a big success, and I'm glad to say the fans really received that very well. But look, I still love what I did with the Shads, what I did on the Strat, and I guess people will always think of that as my voice, if you like. Mm. So I have nothing to be ashamed of in that. I'm proud of what we achieved. It's just that, as you say, sometimes you feel that you need to move on and do something a little different. It doesn't mean I've left the Strat behind forever. It's just something I'm doing at the moment.
It's been great to hear you talk about the songs today too. Great to have you in our studio. All the best for your time in New Zealand.
Oh, thanks for having me here on this trip to Mars. I tell you what, I'll never forget it.
Hank Marvin, 8 months to Mars.